In the vast, silent corners of Canada, 5 chilling mysteries remain unsolved, each more disturbing than the last. The Harper family vanished without a trace in the forests of British Columbia. A mysterious artist, David Lorne, left behind lifelike mannequins and one real corpse beneath Lake Minden. Photographer Vincent Moreau built a mirrored tomb for his lost love, Elise. Postmaster Thomas Greer disappeared after receiving a photo taken inside his own bedroom, and a team of explorers vanished beneath Nova Scotia's Whispering Station, their final words lost to static. Together, their stories form Canada's most haunting collection of unanswered nightmares. The small town of Clearwater, tucked deep within the endless pine forests of British Columbia, was the kind of place where people never locked their doors, and everyone knew each other by name. On a quiet summer afternoon in 1998, the Harper family, Mark, his wife Emily, and their 2 children, Sam and Lily, set out for a picnic by the river. The weather was calm, the air smelled of pine sap and fresh soil, and the sun filtered through the trees in long golden beams. It was supposed to be a perfect day. They never came back. Later that evening, a passing hiker noticed their blue pickup truck parked near the trailhead. The driver's door was open, and a picnic basket sat on the front seat, half empty. Inside were sandwiches, juice boxes, and a folded blanket. The keys dangled from the ignition. At first, it looked like the family had gone for a short walk, maybe to enjoy the forest before heading home. But as night fell, the truck remained untouched, and a thick fog began to roll in from the woods. The hiker reported it to the local police, setting off one of the strangest disappearances the town had ever seen. When search teams arrived the next morning, they found a neat set of footprints leading from the truck into the trees. 4 sets, one clearly belonging to a small child. The tracks continued for almost 2 kilometers before fading abruptly into a patch of damp moss. No signs of a struggle, no animal tracks, and no secondary trail. It was as if the family had simply stepped off the face of the earth. Dozens of volunteers combed the area for days, calling out their names, but their voices were swallowed by the forest. As the investigation dragged on, strange stories began to surface. Some campers claimed they had seen flickering lights moving between the trees late at night. Others said they heard faint laughter echoing through the woods, soft, distant, and unmistakably human. One woman swore she saw a figure standing motionless near the riverbank, dressed in a pale blue shirt, just like the one Mark Harper had been wearing that day. When she blinked, the figure was gone. By early autumn, the search had been called off. The forest had grown colder, and the hope of finding them alive had vanished. Months later, a park ranger making his rounds discovered something buried just beneath a thin layer of frozen soil. It was a child's shoe, perfectly clean despite the mud and frost, placed upright as though someone had set it there deliberately. Nearby, under the roots of an old pine, lay a neatly folded piece of paper with no writing on it, just a faint fingerprint smudged in the corner. The Harper family was never found. Their house still stands at the edge of Clearwater, untouched and overgrown with ivy. Neighbors say the lights sometimes flicker inside late at night, even though the power was cut off years ago. In the silence of the woods, some claim they can still hear the laughter of 2 children, carried on the wind that whispers through the pines. Lake Minden sat deep in northern Ontario, far from highways or cities, surrounded by miles of dense pine forest and mist that never seemed to lift. It was a peaceful place where fishermen came to escape the noise of the world. That peace shattered one early morning in 2004, when 2 local fishermen spotted something floating near the center of the lake. From a distance, it looked like a body. When they rowed closer, their relief was short-lived. It was a mannequin, pale and lifeless, its face painted to look disturbingly human. The men pulled it to shore and alerted the authorities. The police dismissed it as a prank, maybe teenagers trying to scare locals. But within days, more mannequins began to appear. Each was different, with unique facial features, but all had the same eerie detail: glass eyes, carefully applied makeup, and faintly painted veins beneath the skin. What disturbed investigators most was the craftsmanship. These weren't store-bought mannequins. They were made by hand, with an obsessive level of care. When divers were sent to explore the lake, they made a chilling discovery. Beneath the still surface, tied to heavy stones, were more mannequins, arranged in a perfect circle on the lakebed. In the middle of that circle was something else. It wasn't plastic, it was real. A woman's body, pale and preserved by the cold water. She had no identification. No missing person report matched her face. Her hands were positioned neatly on her stomach, and her eyes were open, staring blankly toward the surface. The divers who recovered her described a strange feeling in the water, as if they were being watched. Forensic experts could find no cause of death. There were no wounds, no signs of struggle. It was as if she had simply stopped breathing. Her fingerprints were run through every Canadian and US database, but there were no matches. Investigators traced the mannequin's materials to a single art supply store in Toronto that sold a rare type of silicone resin. When they went to question the store's owner, they found the place abandoned. The lights were still on and the back door was unlocked. Inside the workshop, dozens of unfinished mannequins stood lined up against the walls. Each face had been sculpted to perfection, yet none had eyes. On a long wooden table lay a single mannequin head, with a wide, knowing smile painted across its lips. The owner, a sculptor named David Lorne, had vanished a month before the first discovery at Lake Minden. Neighbors said he had grown withdrawn after the death of his wife, who had drowned in an accident near Muskoka. Some claimed he spent nights in his workshop, talking softly to his creations. Others remembered seeing him loading a small boat onto his truck shortly before he disappeared. The police drained a section of Lake Minden in hopes of finding evidence, but nothing new was ever uncovered. The mannequins were removed and locked away in storage. Yet strange things continued to happen around the lake. Campers reported hearing faint splashing at night, even when the water was still. Some said they saw pale faces under the surface, just beneath the moonlight. To this day, no one knows who the woman in the lake was, or what connection she had to the vanished artist. But locals still say the mannequins were never just mannequins. They were his way of keeping her alive over and over again. The apartment building on Saint-Urbain Street in Montreal had been empty for nearly a decade before the demolition crew arrived in the spring of 2011. Its walls were cracked. Its hallways smelled of dust and mold, and every door creaked with age. The building had once been home to artists, musicians, and students. But after a series of unexplained disappearances, most tenants moved out, leaving only silence behind. The demolition was supposed to be routine. Tear it down, clear the lot, and make way for something new. But as workers began removing drywall from the third floor, they discovered a wall that wasn't supposed to be there. Behind it was a sealed door with no knob, no handle, and layers of paint hiding its outline. When they finally broke it open, they stepped into a room that hadn't seen daylight in years. The air was cold, almost unnaturally so, and the floor was covered with a fine layer of salt. Every wall was lined with mirrors, some cracked, others perfectly clear. In the middle of the room sat a single wooden chair, facing an old video camera mounted on a tripod. The chair's legs were worn, the seat slightly indented, as if someone had sat there for hours at a time. On the far wall, written over and over again in uneven handwriting, were 5 haunting words. I didn't want to forget her face. The camera's memory card was still inside. Investigators sent it for analysis, but it contained nothing but static. Forensic experts tried to restore the footage, but every attempt failed. It was as if the recording had been deliberately wiped clean. Not deleted, but overwritten repeatedly until nothing remained. Still, traces of faint sound waves were detected near the end of the file, distorted fragments that resembled breathing. When the building's old tenant records were reviewed, police found that a photographer named Vincent Moreau had lived in that very apartment 10 years earlier. He had disappeared shortly after his girlfriend, a woman named Elise, was killed in a car accident just outside the city. Friends described him as quiet and devoted, though deeply shaken after her death. He had stopped taking clients and began experimenting with strange photographic techniques. Long exposures, shadow studies, and portraits of people with blurred faces. Then, one night, he vanished without a trace. Inside the hidden room, detectives also found a series of photographs stacked neatly in a box. Each image showed a woman's face reflected in a mirror, but none of the reflections matched. The angles, lighting, and features were slightly off, as if different faces were trying to mimic the same expression. One photograph stood out, a close-up of a woman's eyes, identical to Elise's from her old passport photo. Across the bottom of the image was a faint fingerprint in smudged ink. Experts determined the room had been sealed from the inside. There were no windows, no secondary exits. The salt on the floor showed no signs of footprints, suggesting no one had entered or left for years. Yet, workers claimed that after they opened the door, the mirrors fogged up on their own one by one, as though something inside the room had started to breathe again. The building was demolished days later, but the memory of that room lingered. People who worked on the site reported hearing faint clicks in the night, like the sound of a camera shutter echoing through the air. Some say that if you stand on the empty lot at dawn, the light sometimes bends, just enough to catch a reflection that isn't your own. The town of Yukon River Bend sat quietly at the edge of the northern wilderness, surrounded by snowfields that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. It was a place of stillness, where winter lasted most of the year and strangers rarely passed through. Yet, on the outskirts of town, along a lonely gravel road, stood a single red mailbox that no one could explain. It wasn't connected to any house or route. The post office had no record of it. But for as long as anyone could remember, letters kept appearing inside. At first they seemed harmless, blank envelopes containing nothing but photographs. Each photo showed people asleep in their beds, bathed in the glow of a bedside lamp or the faint shimmer of moonlight through curtains. None of the residents recognized the faces. The bedrooms were unfamiliar, the houses unknown. The photos were always taken from the same perspective, as if someone had been standing in the corner of the room, watching. The local postmaster, a quiet man named Thomas Greer, took the first report seriously. He drove out to the mailbox every few days, collected the envelopes, and handed them to the authorities. The police assumed it was an elaborate hoax. They checked the film, the paper, even the stamps. Nothing led anywhere. The negatives had no fingerprints, and the images contained no metadata, as if they had been developed in an old-fashioned darkroom far from any modern lab. Over time, the mailbox became a local legend. Teenagers dared each other to visit it after dark, leaving empty envelopes inside to see if they would be replaced. Sometimes the envelopes disappeared. Other times they came back filled with new photographs. Then, one morning in the spring of 2018, Thomas arrived at work early and found a single envelope waiting on his desk. There was no postage, no sender. Written across the front, in uneven handwriting, was his name. Inside was a photograph of his own home, taken from inside his bedroom. The angle was impossible. It showed him asleep, turned slightly toward the window, with the faint reflection of someone standing beside the bed. The next day, Thomas drove out to the mailbox before sunrise. A storm was rolling in from the mountains, and snow was beginning to fall. When he didn't return by noon, a search party went looking for him. They found his truck idling on the roadside, the driver's door open, and the keys still in the ignition. The red mailbox was gone. In its place was a small patch of disturbed snow, as though something heavy had been dragged away. Weeks passed with no trace of Thomas or the mailbox. Then one night, a resident walking her dog along the same road noticed something half buried beneath the snowdrift. It was a photograph sealed in a clear plastic sleeve. The picture showed the red mailbox standing alone in the same spot it had always been. But in the background, barely visible through the falling snow, was the faint silhouette of a man. His face was turned toward the camera and his eyes were open. No one ever saw the mailbox again. Yet every few years, when the snow begins to melt, people claim to find new envelopes scattered near the old road, each containing fresh photographs of homes, bedrooms, and faces sleeping peacefully. And among them, always the same man, watching. Deep in the forested hills of Nova Scotia, far from any paved road or power line, stood the remains of an old radio transmission tower. It had been built in the 1970s for shortwave broadcasts that never gained much use, and after a few years of operation, the facility was abandoned. The structure rusted in the damp coastal air, its steel frame humming softly when the wind passed through. Locals called it the Whispering Station. They said that on quiet nights, if you stood beneath the tower, you could hear voices hidden in the static. Soft, broken sentences that faded in and out like old recordings from another time. For decades, the stories were dismissed as superstition. That changed in 2019, when a group of urban explorers from Halifax decided to visit the site for a documentary on forgotten places. They brought cameras, microphones, and a live streaming setup to record everything in real time. The footage began just before dusk. The tower loomed against the gray sky, surrounded by skeletal trees and patches of mist rising from the ground. Their voices were calm and joking at first, as they set up camp beneath the main structure. One camera was left aimed at the tower. Another pointed toward the old generator building a few meters away. For the first several hours, nothing unusual happened. The explorers talked about local legends, about how the tower once transmitted coded messages during the Cold War. Around midnight, the static began. A low hum came through their microphones, too steady to be mere wind. Then came a faint voice, high-pitched, almost childlike, whispering what sounded like a name. The group froze. The sound faded, then returned, louder this time, repeating the same two words over and over. None of them could agree on what it said. They decided to continue recording, hoping to capture more evidence. At exactly 5 hours and 12 minutes into the stream, something shifted. The tower lights, long dead, flickered once. The audio filled with a sudden burst of white noise, and then the video cut out. Viewers watching the stream online later said that just before the feed ended, the static on screen formed the shape of a human face, a pale outline, mouthing the words, "We're still here." When local police hiked to the site 2 days later, they found the explorers' equipment scattered around the clearing. The cameras were intact, still powered on, but the footage after that 5-hour mark had been erased. Their tents were zipped shut, food untouched, and there were no signs of a struggle or footprints leading away from the area. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. Technicians who examined the remaining footage reported hearing faint frequencies beyond the normal range of human hearing, similar to shortwave transmissions. When these sounds were slowed down and filtered, they formed what seemed to be words spoken in different voices, some male, some female, layered over each other, repeating fragments of sentences like broken transmissions trying to synchronize. The forest eventually reclaimed the Whispering Station. The tower remained standing, rusted and bent, its signal long dead. Yet hikers who wander too close still claim their radios pick up whispers on silent channels, distorted voices calling out names that no one recognizes. Some say if you stay too long, you'll hear your own name among them, faint and distant, carried by the wind that hums through the forgotten steel. Canada's vast landscapes hold beauty, but also darkness. From the mysterious disappearance of the Harper family to the haunting silence of the Whispering Station, each story reminds us that not every secret buried in the snow can be uncovered. These unsolved crimes continue to echo through time, leaving behind whispers, empty houses, and unanswered questions. Some mysteries fade with the years. Others wait patiently to be found. If these stories gave you chills, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more real and disturbing mysteries from around the world. Share your theories in the comments, because maybe you hold the missing piece to Canada's most haunting secrets.